welcome Eve Ensler to our stage tonight with her new memoir, In the Body of the World. Joining her in conversation is Mark Matousek. He is the award-winning... author of 5 books and writes regularly for numerous national magazines and literary anthologies. Mark is on the faculty at the New York Open Center and the Omega Institute, and is a regular teacher at Miriam's Well, Old Stone Farm, and the Mandala Center. His introspective writing courses have helped thousands of people transform their lives through self-inquiry, which is the mission of his company, Mark Matousek Media. He is the creative director of V-Men, the male arm of V-Day, Eve Ensler's movement to end violence against women and girls. Without further ado, let me hand the stage over to Mark and Eve.
Good evening. I'm glad you could come out to help us celebrate the launch of Eve's fantastic new book, In the Body of the World. For those of you who don't know, Eve is a Tony Award-winning playwright, performer, activist, and poet. She's the author of many plays, including the Vagina Monologues, which established her reputation as an artistic and political game changer, and has run for 10 years in Paris and Mexico City, and has been performed in 140 countries and was an HBO film. I Am an Emotional Creature, The Secret Life of Girls Around the World, was both a play and a New York Times best-selling book. The Good Body, Necessary Targets, The Depot, Extraordinary Measures, and many others. Her books include Insecure at Last, a political memoir, and the anthology A Memory, a Monologue, a Rant, and a Prayer. She's the recipient of many awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship in Playwriting, and Obie. Eve was named one of Newsweek's 150 Women Who Changed the World, The Guardian's 100 Most Influential Women, and one of U.S. News and World Report's Best Leaders. Oprah Winfrey also just chose this book as one of her riveting reads to pick up in May. Eve's experience performing the Vagina Monologues inspired her to create V-Day, a global movement to stop violence against women and girls, which has raised over $90 million in the past 15 years. In 2001, V-Day opened the revolutionary City of Joy, a women's healing community in the Democratic Republic of Congo, launched the Karama program in the Middle East, and funded over 13,000 community-based anti-violence programs and safe houses in Haiti, Kenya, South Dakota, Egypt, and Iraq. Finally, this year, on February 14th, Eve and V-Day helped to foment the largest global action in history to end violence against women and girls, 1 Billion Rising. One Billion Rising inspired women and men in 207 countries to come together to express their outrage and to strike, dance, and rise against violence. She's a visionary, a humanitarian, and a true artist. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce my dear friend, Eve Ensler. This book is extraordinary, and I don't use that word lightly. It's brave, it's beautiful, and it really is about coming through a fire and being transformed. So let's go back to the beginning. It's 2010. It's 2 months away from opening the City of Joy, and you discover, or it is discovered, a large tumor in your uterus. Can you take us back to that moment?
Yes. But before I do, I just have to take a moment to be here in this room because so many people that I love are in this room right now, and I just am overwhelmed. I'm just overwhelmed. Thank you all for being here. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge a couple of people, if I can. One is my amazing agent, Charlotte Sheedy, who has been my agent since I was 23, and has stuck with me through vaginas and fires and everything else. So and is one of the most amazing women and devoted to feminists and so many incredible women, giving her life to bring women's words to the world. So thank you. Cody, who today somebody was telling me that they were just going, they were really saying nice things about how clean and clear and to the point the book was, and I said, well, that was Frances, that was not me. She was really the best, just the best editor I've ever had, and was there with me in such a midwifing, loving way through this book, which was really the most physical thing I've ever done, and both she and Charlotte were just like there every minute, and I just thank you so much, Frances, for your incredible work on this book. Thank you. And I want to thank Sarah Rutel and Melanie and Brooke and everybody at Holt. It's been such an incredible experience working with you and working with Metropolitan, and just the love and just energy you have behind this book has just been transformative for me. And so thank you for your belief and confidence. And in the first row is an amazing man who was one of the people who saved my life, Dr. Lewis Katz. And I'm going to take a moment because, you know, we all have, Dr. Katz has been my doctor for a very long time, and he really was the person who, at various stages during my cancer, intervened and would literally point me in another direction through his house calls, through his love, through his kindness, through his belief that I would get well. And I just thank you. Thank you. To acknowledging all the friends here, because I'll probably be acknowledging every person in the room. But I want to say for the people who were close by my side, from Toast to Diana to Paula to Kim to Marie to Mark to James to all the people, I mean there's so many more and I don't want to forget anybody. I am grateful to my bones, Perva, I don't know if she's here, for your care and your love, because I would not be here today without it. And this is a very profound moment for me. It's kind of like I actually did live, it turns out, and I'm kind of aware of it today, you know, so thank you. So now the question was?
The question. So it's 2010. Can you take us back to that moment?
I was, it was 2010. We were waiting for City of Joy to open. We were going through really difficult times with our partner UNICEF and a lot of contracting things that were going on the ground. It was really rough in the Congo, between the war and between the building. And to build in Congo is a very difficult thing because there's no roads, there's no electricity, there's no water, there's no government, there's no cement. So building this was just a ridiculously insane thing to be doing in the first place. And I was on my way to Haiti because we were working on another big project there, and I had symptoms that I was ignoring, which I talk about in this book, the way we kind of live in this semi-sleep, you know, half awake, half asleep, where we know something's wrong, but we don't pay attention to it. Kind of the way we live about everything. We know that climate change is here, but it's not really happening. We know that women get raped, but it's not really happening. We know that there are people being detained in Guantanamo, but it's not really happening. You know, this kind of somnolent state that we live in all the time. And it really got bad, and there was bleeding, and finally, Dr. Katz said, you need to go and get what was the name of it? No, before the CAT scan. What? A colonoscopy, that was it. And there's a reason I forgot, and for more than one reason. And I had the colonoscopy, and I was waiting, and the doctor came out, and you know that grim, gray face when it's the end of the world? He said, it's not good. And I knew it was really bad. And it was really bad. And really within 24 hours, I knew that I had very bad cancer, that I had a tumor that was probably the size of a mango inside me. They didn't know where it was coming from. They didn't know where it had gone. I called up this amazing woman named Dr. Deb Rhodes, and this is a really incredible part of the story and the synchronicity of the story. I had been working with Dr. Rhodes for months because Pat Mitchell, who's on our board, was her patient, and she had told her about the Congo and the work we were doing. So she had read my article, and she had called me crying one day, this doctor, to say, I will do anything to help you. And so she and her doctors were planning a trip to the Congo to operate with Dr. McGuege at Pansy Hospital on the women who had been raped and eviscerated. And I had only known her as an activist. And after I got the diagnosis, I called her and I told her what had happened, and she said, get on a plane now. And that was on a Friday, and I had 2 speeches to give over the weekend. I didn't want to disappoint people, so I went to DC and just cried through all the speeches. People thought I was really passionate. I had no idea why I was crying. And all I kept thinking is, this will be the last speech I ever give. And then on Monday, I got to Mayo with Tony, and Tuesday, my friends arrived, and I had the exams, and it was the worst day of my life. We went from exam to exam, and every place we went, people were like, oh, we think it's here, we think it's here, we think it's here. And by the last thing, they kind of held up this thing and they said, it's here, it's here, it's here, and we think it's in your liver. And at that point, I just thought, well, I want to go to the Congo. And I said to Tony, let's go to the Congo. And he was like, you're not going to the Congo. We kind of wrestled in the elevator. And the next morning, I went into 9-hour surgery. So it was...
Not knowing if it was in
No, I didn't know if it was in my liver. I didn't know if I'd have a permanent bag. I didn't know if I'd ever wake up. They didn't know how far it was when I went into the surgery. And I have to say that was the most radical moment of my life. You know, it was kind of, yeah.
And as radical as it was, and as scary, it seems like from the beginning, you saw cancer as a metaphor. You saw what was happening to your body as a parallel to what's happening to the earth.
I did. And I think on my way to the Mayo, I remember having this image in my head every time I would close my eyes, that there was this ball inside me, and it was like a ball of yarn, and it was wrapped with all these strings that were stories of women, and the stories of rape, and the story of abuse, and the story of incest, and the story of pain that I'd heard all of my travels, and it had grown and grown and grown and grown to be this huge tumor, and it was all I kept seeing the whole ride to the Mayo. And as a matter of fact, the night before I had surgery, I was really drugged, thank God for drugs, and I said to my friends, tomorrow they're going to take Congo out. And I meant to say cancer, or the tumor, but I said Congo. And I think it was so clear to me that what was inside of me was connected to everything that had been in my life and had gone into me, whether it began with the abuse of my father, which was there as part of one of those stories. There were lots of stories that made that yarn ball, you know, into that tumor.
Could you read that section?
Cancer threw me through the window of my disassociation into the center of my body's crisis. The Congo threw me deep into the crisis of the world, and these two experiences merged as I faced the disease, and what I felt was the beginning of the end. Suddenly, the cancer in me was the cancer that is everywhere. The cancer of cruelty, the cancer of greed, the cancer that gets inside people who live downstream from chemical plants, the cancer inside the lungs of coal miners, the cancer from the stress of not achieving enough, the cancer of buried trauma, the cancer that lives in caged chickens and oil-drenched fish, the cancer of carelessness, the cancer in fast-paced, must have it, smoke it, own it, formaldehyde, asbestos, pesticide, hair-dyed, cigarette cell phones, now. My body was no longer an abstraction. There were men cutting into it, and tubes coming out of it, and bags and catheters draining it, and needles bruising it and making it bleed. I was blood and poop and pee and pus. I was burning and nauseous and feverish and weak. I was of the body, in the body. I was body, body, body. Cancer, a disease of pathologically dividing cells, burned away the walls of my separateness and landed me in my body, just as the Congo landed me in the body of the world.
Beautiful. And it's not only cancer, but it's cancer of the uterus. And the ironies, the sort of cruel irony of that after the work that you've done with women. I love what you write about hysteria and the uterus. Could you read that section?
Yeah. Of course, all I obsessed about for a long time was why I had cancer of the uterus, you know, because I think where we get cancer is such a telling thing about our lives in some way, metaphorically. So, what is most pressing now? Why cancer in my uterus? Uterus, a hollow, muscular organ in the pelvic cavity of female mammals, in which the embryo is nourished and develops before birth. I tried to imagine my uterus accommodating this tumor the way it might have once held a baby. I almost had 2 of them. Babies. Is there a point to a uterus if you don't make a baby? Was the tumor a way of growing something? Was I growing a trauma baby? I remember years ago when I was going through a period when I seemed to be sick all the time, a shrink friend saying to me in that knowing and slightly patronizing, sorry for me kind of way, "You somatize, Eve. You do. You somatize." It was one of those words like individuate. I had to look it up. Somatize. How the body defends itself against too much stress, manifesting psychological distress as physical symptoms in the stomach or nerves or uterus or vagina. I read that women who had suffered physical, emotional, and sexual abuse tended to somatize more. It turns out that somatization is related to hysteria, which stems from the Greek cognate of uterus. Hysteria, uterus equals hysteria. They always called me hysterical in my family. Extreme feeling, Sarah Bernhardt, intense. But what is extreme? Again, it depends on 10. I mean, what would be the appropriate level of emotional response to someone beating you daily? Or calling you jackass, or stupid, or molesting you? What would be the non-hysterical response to living in a world where so many are eating dirt and swimming in the sewage system in Port-au-Prince to unclog the drains and find plastic bottles to sell? What would be the appropriate non-hysterical response to people blindfolding other people and walking them around naked on leashes, or watching waving people being abandoned on rooftops in a flood? What would be the proper way to experience these things? Hysteria. A word to make women feel insane for knowing what they know. A word that has so many implications: hysterical, out of control, insane, can't take her seriously, raving. Hysteria is caused by suffering from a huge trauma where there is an underlying conflict. What was my conflict? Loving my mother and father, betraying my mother when my father molested me, wanting my father all to myself even if it hurt my mother, witnessing and hearing the most horrific stories in the world inflicted on women's bodies and being unable to stop it in spite of every effort, wanting to fall in love and being totally unable to trust, hungering for connection and always finding it claustrophobic. What doesn't cause or produce conflicted feelings? What isn't traumatizing? So does removing my uterus mean they have removed my hysteria? I actually don't feel any less hysterical. Actually, the tubes and the bags and the needles are making me quite upset. And I wonder if there's such a thing as rape cancer. Do I have rape cancer? Do we get it if we've been molested or traumatized or raped? Are there rape cancer cells that get formed at the moment of violation and then get released into the bloodstream of another moment of trauma later in life? How many women with vaginal and uterine and ovarian cancer have been raped or beaten or traumatized? Does anyone know? Would Mayo do a study? Is there a way to cure rape cancer? Does each future trauma release more rape cancer cells? Is trauma cancer? Is this kind of obsessing the reason I'm sick? Am I hysterical? Alert. 8, 8, 8, maybe even 9. I hit the oxycodone button.
It wasn't easy for you to be a patient.
No.
You'd been a caretaker and sort of superwoman all these years. What was it like to suddenly not be able to walk on your own, feed yourself?
I think that for me, the worst thing that could have ever happened to me was what happened to me. It wasn't the cancer, it was stopping. It was stopping. It was stopping. I realize now, and I feel this so deeply, how much of my life I was trying to stay away from my body and away from it, whatever it was. You know, I think so many of us who have been hurt or traumatized at the beginning flee, and our life is about fleeing and staying in a state of fleeing. And what cancer did is it forced me to stop. It forced me to get located. It forced me to stop leaving and enter into what this was, my body. And I think now looking back on it, you know, I was saying this the other day about my body. My body was really this contaminated cesspool in my mind. It was a place that had become soured and humiliated, and an enormous amount of badness had been projected onto it. And I didn't want to live here anymore. I didn't want to be here anymore. And what cancer did, when I woke up after 9 hours of surgery and losing 7 organs and 70 nodes, I was body. There was nothing else but body. I was in my body, tubes and all. And in a way, I was the happiest that I'd ever been, just even in the midst of the pain and in the midst of all the bizarre things that were going on, because I was home. And whatever had been removed, but I was in it. I was in it. And I think looking back now, how much of my life and how many women I've met in my travels who've been searching their whole life to get back home, whether it's home into this body or home back to the earth, which we've been so divorced from and so disassociated from, that return was enormous. It was enormous.
But after that return, there was also then a dive.
Yeah,
wasn't
there
there?
wasn't.
This wasn't just overnight feeling
No.
good about it. This book really is for me about a mystic death and awakening. St. John of the Cross talks about the dark night of the soul, and you truly went through a dark night of the soul, and you're so open about your despair. I'd love it. Could you read what the section about the tree ending, coming back to life?
Yeah. I just want to say just one other thing about the dark night of the soul. You know, I think so much of what this culture teaches us to know is to avoid, deny, and push away. And so our whole lives are spent denying and avoiding and pushing away, which creates enormous isolation and despair, and it takes up a lot of energy. And I think if this journey has taught me anything, it's walking into the fire where all your energy and connection and life comes from. And we just need to trust that more, and we need to support each other walking into the fire. You can't do it alone. You need people who are with you to help you walk into the fire. So after I got sick for the third time with the infection, I got put into this room, and the only thing that was there was a tree, and I had to spend my days staring at this tree, and I hated trees, and I was such an urban person, and I was so alienated from nature, and I thought, oh my God, I can't work, I can't move, I can't do anything but this tree. So here it was. The room was the room of my dreams. It was clean and pretty, all the machinery was there, but it was human. There was a couch that pulled out for sleeping and a small kitchen and a window right in front of the bed. What I hadn't anticipated was the tree. I was too weak to think or write or call or even watch a movie. All I could do was stare at the tree, which was the only thing in my view. At first, it annoyed me, and I thought I would go mad from boredom. But after the first days and many hours, I began to see the tree. On Tuesday, I meditated on bark. On Friday, the green leaves shimmering in the late afternoon light. For hours, I lost myself, my body, my being, dissolving into tree. I was raised in America, all value lies in the future, in the dream, in production. There is no present tense. There is no value in what is, only in what might be made or exploited from what already exists. Of course, the same was true for me. I had no inherent value. Without work or effort, without making myself into something significant, without proving my worth, I had no right or reason to be here. Life itself was inconsequential unless it led to something, unless the tree would be wood, would be house, would be table. What value was there to tree? So to actually lie in my hospital bed and see tree, enter the tree, find the green life inherent in the tree, this was the awakening. Each morning I opened my eyes, I could not wait to focus on tree. I would let the tree take me. Each day it was different based on the light or wind or rain. The tree was a tonic and a cure, a guru and a teaching. I never want to see another tree, I said with bravado at 22 as I was speeding down a turnpike away from the green hills of Vermont toward Manhattan. I think I said fucking tree. I never want to see another fucking tree. It was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. I hated trees. They had come to me in small towns and small minds, isolation and gossip, long freezing winters and endless green swallowing landscapes, skiing co-eds and empty chatter, families and babies, marriage and life. Trees had everything to do with life. I drove that day out of the forests and hills and blue skies and nights of falling stars into concrete after-hours joints, mafia hitmen, anonymous sex, anonymous despair, gin and bourbon and an end to mourning, let alone trees. I see now how much I wanted to die or how much I did not want to live with the pain inside me. A group therapist once said, if you want to understand your relationship to your mother, look at your relationship to groups. But I say, look at your relationship to the earth. The earth was terrifying to me and separate, radically apart and foreign. I wanted it so much, I stopped wanting it. The tree outside my room brought back other trees, trees I had seen without seeing, had loved without loving, the weeping willow at the bottom of my driveway in Scarsdale, madly shedding in the fall, making a shimmering bed of soft, white, lime leaves. The majestic pine trees in Croatia by the sea, filled with cruciferous cicados in late summer. The single tree in the middle of the Mara in Kenya, the lonely, solitary tree that I first sat under with a beaded Maasai woman who had stopped the practice of female genital mutilation on her daughter, and she kept playfully punching my arm with joy. The tree in Kabul, or I should say the stump of an ancient tree that had been cut down and burned by rebels, and the way the old, very wrinkled caretaker of the park cried when he talked about the 100-year-old tree becoming firewood for some wild men for a few stupid nights. I had days of silence with my tree and my dear friend, Paris neighbor, Marie Cecile, who came to stay with me in the hospital. I know her silence was new like the tree, and at first it was disconcerting, then over time delicious. There was an outrageous birthday party in my room, there was CAT scans, there was the tree, my tree. Not that I owned it, I had no desire for that, but it had come to be my friend, my point of connection and meditation, my new reason to live. I was not writing or producing or on the phone or making anything happen. Okay, I did make calls to Congo every day. I was not contributing much more than my appreciation of a tree, my love of green, my commitment to trunk and bark, my celebration of branch, my insane delight over the gentle white May blossoms that were beginning to flower everywhere.
Which brings us to chemo, which was very scary for you. But you were able to use it as a sort of a symbolic agent of change, weren't you?
Because I had a lot of help. I think for me, the most terrifying part of this process was chemotherapy. And I think there was something about the idea of poison being pumped into my system that I could handle being cut open, I could handle infections, but the idea of sitting while poison just felt like I couldn't do it. And I went through this period where I wasn't going to do it. And then I had an amazing therapist, Sue. I don't know if she's here tonight.
She's here.
Is she there? Will you stand up, Sue? Sue showed up one day and she said, I'm going to do you a favor and I'm going to come and sit with you once a week through your chemotherapy. And it was like the greatest gift. And I was in complete and utter terror. And you know, it was funny because therapists never come to your house, and there was something about her being in my house which was intense to begin with. And then she sat on my couch and she gave me a vision of what it could be like. And I have to say, I think this is just the most brilliant vision. And for the last few days, I've been traveling around with the book, and I've been talking about it. And everywhere I'm going, it's like this new way of seeing chemo. So I attribute it to Sue. But this is what she said to me. Eve, the chemo is not for you. It's for the cancer. For all the past crimes. It's for your father. It's for the rapists. It's for the perpetrators. You're going to poison them now, and they are never coming back. Chemo will purge the badness that was projected onto you, but was never yours. I have total faith in your resilience and the magical capacities of your body and soul for healing. Your job is to welcome the chemo as an empathetic warrior who is coming in to rescue your innocence by killing off the perpetrator who got inside you. You have many bodies. New ones will be born out of this transformational time of love and care. When you feel nauseous or terrible, just imagine how hard the chemo is fighting on your behalf and on behalf of all women's bodies, restoring wholeness, innocence, peace. Welcome the chemo as an empathetic warrior. I look forward to chemo after that. I'm not kidding. You know, I think everything has so much to do with how you frame it and how you see it. It determines so much of your experience. And I really believe we should be fighting and really pressing oncologists to be creating things called transformational suites instead of chemo suites. and that we should begin to see chemo as transformational juice that can burn away what needs to be burned away. If we're going to have it, we might as well use it to do what it has to do. And I sometimes say to Tony, you know, I'm really nostalgic for chemo, because it's a weird thing to say, but it was such an amazing time. It was such an amazing time. I got to be with my friends, I got to sit and be still, I got to burn away what needed to go. And honestly, it's gone. It's gone. It's gone. So it can happen for everybody. You know, this isn't a do-it-at-home project. Like, by the way, this isn't like get your chemo at home. But I will say that when we get these medicines, the power of them and the power to turn poison to medicine is in the way we frame things. And I just want to honor Sue, and I want to honor people who are guides and mentors and provide a frame, because frames are what save our lives.
Absolutely. And when this was burning away, there was also a layer of defense against love burned away for you also. Didn't you have a revelation about what love truly was and what you had been avoiding in your life?
I did, and I think the two things that burned away are my fear of ordinary and being ordinary, and my fear of love. And when I say about ordinary, you know, I never watched television, and I was really proud to tell everybody that all the time. And I was a vegetarian for 30 years, and you know, the first thing I wanted when I woke up from surgery was a hamburger, and I ate one which was really deadly, and I didn't eat for 2 weeks after that, but it was delicious, you know. And the other thing was that I ended up watching a lot of television, and I just loved every minute of it. And to the point where I became a Friday Night Lights addict and watched 4 episodes at a clip. But the thing that happened with love is, you know, I think I'll just read it. But yeah, I'll just read it. Where am I starting on? This one? Yeah. Love was something you succeeded or failed at. It was like a corporate activity. You won or lost. People loved you, and then they didn't. As with trees, I had missed the point. The men I, in theory, had loved and who, in theory, had loved me had all disappeared. After years of involvement, not one had found his way to my loft during those long, burning months. I received a 2-line email from my first husband of 15 years, a card from a partner of 13 years, and no word from another lover of equal duration. Later, I heard he was insulted that I hadn't reached out to tell him I had cancer. No blame, just the facts. I had failed at love, or at the story I had bought about love. As I rode my burning body down to the bottom of the world, I passed the ghosts and glories of those love affairs, hideous moments and tender ones. Honestly, not much remained. No resentments, no longings. And that's what was most painful, to think at 56 I had come to this, no lover, no mate, and no nurturing memories. Despair burned in me. There were days when the leaves of my romantic failings made a bonfire inside me. The story I had been living about love was now clearly over. The landscape was charred. There was no way forward or back. While this fire raged in me, some other alchemic dance that I could not even recognize was happening around me. There was MC cooking me soft-boiled eggs at 5 a.m. to calm my stomach, Amy, who I hardly knew, stopping by unexpectedly to rub my feet, Carol sending me weekly boxes of silky pajamas. The list goes on. These daily, subtle, simple gathering of kindnesses stretched out across the chemo days and months was, in fact, love. Love. Why hadn't I known this was love? I was always reaching for love, but love, turns out, doesn't involve reaching. I was always dreaming of the big love, the ultimate love, the love that would sweep me off my feet or break open the hard shell of my lesser self. The love that would bring on my surrender, the love that would inspire me to give everything. As I lay there, it occurred to me that while I had been dreaming of this big love, this ultimate love, I had, without realizing it, been giving and receiving love for most of my life. As with the trees that were right in front of me, I had been unable to value what sustained me, fed me, gave me pleasure. And as with the trees, I was so busy waiting for and imagining and reaching and dreaming and preparing for this huge, big love that I had totally missed the beauty and perfection of the soft-boiled eggs and the Bolivian quinoa. So much of life, it seems to me, is the framing and naming of things. I had been so busy creating a future of love that I never identified the life I was living as the life of love. Because up until then, I had never felt entitled or free enough or honestly brave enough to embrace my own narrative. Ironically, I had gone ahead and created the life I secretly must have wanted, but it had to be covert and off the record. Chemo was burning away the wrapper, and suddenly I was in my version of life. Thus began the ecstasy, the joy, the pure joy of a spiritual pirate who finds the secret treasure.
And now you've been cancer-free for 3 years. It feels like your work and your vision is inseparable from your physical healing. And at the end of the book, it comes together beautifully in the City of Joy and in the women of the Congo. And you talk about it as a second wind. Would you share that?
Yes, and I just want to say one thing about the City of Joy. You know, the City of Joy is open. It's doing incredibly well. We just graduated our 3rd class, and it's the most beautiful place I've ever been. And I was there for a month, a couple months ago, and there are 90 girls there at any given time from 14 to 25. They arrive broken, abused, suffering some of the worst atrocities of the world. They have bullet holes sometime in their heads. They are missing organs. They have nightmares every night. They have children born of rape who they're trying to love, and they've come there to learn to love. And literally, the women of Congo run it. It's theirs. It's completely owned by them, determined by them. And the most beautiful social workers, Christine Schuler-Describer is the director and leads it. And these girls, you know, are the most amazing women. And they go through therapy, which is group therapy and theater and dance and singing. And they learn their rights. And they get educated. And they learn computers. And they learn agricultural training. And when they leave, they are reborn in a way I've never seen rebirth. You know, they are beautiful, and they are full, and they are alive, and they're exactly who they would have been had there not been war, had there not been colonialism, had there not been oppression, had there not been racism. You see who they would have been in this world. And they have inspired me so deeply every day of my life. And when I got done with my operation, my last operation, I went back to the Congo, and I was temporarily incontinent, and I only say that because when women get fistula, which is a condition that women get in the Congo who have been raped incessantly and had things shoved inside them, where you have a hole inside you, they are incontinent. And when I first went to the Congo, I was just struck with what it means to not be able to hold your bodily fluids, how exiled you are because of the smell and how horrible you feel all the time. And when I went back to Pansy Hospital, and I was exactly in the same state as every woman there. And there was this amazing thing that came over me, a feeling like we were all at ground zero together. And the women started to dance, and I started to dance. And it was the most glorious moment of my life, because I understood for the first time what it means to dance your pain into power, and what it means to dance and dissolve into whatever needs to come next, and not to hold on to any place that you are. And so it really, this chapter, this idea was born there of a second wind, and I think there are many of us here who are living lives of second wind, whatever your second wind is, whether you pass through the deepest darkness and you got to come back, whether you lost someone in your life that was dear to you and now you're being reborn again, whether you had a horrible illness. But the second wind is awesome. It's awesome because for all intents and purposes, I'm already dead. I say it to my friend Elizabeth Lesser all the time, you know, I already died. It happened. So now we get to do shit, you know? And it's really good news because I'm not scared anymore. I already died. So I am here to encourage all of you who are in your second wind, or about to begin your second wind, to not be afraid, to not be afraid. There is an urgency right now in every direction that we look in, and we are the people who can shift it, not governments, not people in power, people can shift it. So I will read this with that in mind. I have lost my organs and at times my mind. I know it is a race now between the people who are helping themselves to the earth, to the loot, and the rest of us. I despise charity. It gives crumbs to a few and silences the others. Either we go all the way now, or there is no more way. Who will step off the wheel? Who will join the women who have lived in the forests and the projects and the loud and cramped cities, and who carry sacks of pain on their backs and hungry babies on their breasts, who are not counted, whose strength and whose work hold up the world? Who will stand with them and trust that they have always known the way? The world burns in my veins, just like chemo did only a few months ago. I dare you to stop counting and start acting, to stop pleasing and start defying. I dare you to trust what you know. The second wind is beyond data. It's past pain. It's found in the bloodstream and cells of the women and men who purge the poison of their perpetrators, who walk through the cancer, the nightmares. The second wind is coming from your body. It's in your mouth. It's in the way you move your hips. Every vision is necessary now. Every instinct must be awakened. The wind does not turn away. It blows through everything. Do not be afraid. There is no more winning and losing. We have already lost. Even the so-called winners feel that way. That is why they can't stop self-destructing. Step off the wheel of winning and losing. Of course there is risk. Of course it is dangerous. I wish I could make this easy for you. I wish I could tell you there is nothing to lose. Lose everything. That is where it begins. Each one of you will know in what direction you need to move and who to take with you. You will recognize the others when you arrive. Build the circles. Listen to the voice inside. And when they say, this is the only way we can profit, we need the oil, we need the drilling, the reactors, the tar sands, the fracking, the coltan, the coal, stay tight in your circles. Dance in the circles. Sing in the circles. Join arms in the circles. Surrender your comfort. We must be willing to go the distance. We must be willing to leave the kingdom and surrender the treasures. We are the people of the second wind. We who have been undermined, reduced, and minimized, we know who we are. Let us be taken. Let us turn our pain to power, our victimhood to fire, our self-hatred to action, our self-obsession to service, to fire, to wind, wind. Be transparent as wind, be as possible and relentless and dangerous. Be what moves things forward without needing to leave a mark. Be part of this collection of molecules that begins somewhere unknown and can't help but keep rising, rising.
Some questions?
We can take some questions or responses. There's somebody in the back.
Well, Ms. Ensler, first I want to thank you for all that you've done to educate people about violence against women. Of all the countries that you've traveled to, which one would you say has the best medical care system, and what can our government do to follow this system more closely?
Wow, the best medical system? That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I'm trying to think where women are really taken care of. Are you talking about just in general medical systems?
Yes.
You know, it's really an interesting question because I think it's really hard to find countries, very many countries in the world, where healthcare and the priorities of people are the, you know, healthcare is a priority. I don't know if I can answer that question. You know, what I will tell you is that the Mayo Clinic is one of the best healthcare facilities I've ever witnessed. And it's probably as close to socialized medicine as we'll ever see in this country. I was deeply, deeply impressed by the way people work there and the fact that surgeons and doctors' salaries are capped, so they can only make a certain amount, so people don't compete with other doctors, but they work as teams. And one of the things I felt when I was operated on and when I was treated there is that there was a group effort led by a head doctor who then was the person who directed the surgeons, but it was a team, a true community that was working. And I think there is something about communities caring for people as opposed to one doctor at the top who's making the money competing with the other doctors that begins to create real care. And I think it's a real model for care everywhere. I was very impressed. Yes.
I couldn't help but notice your comment about charity. What advice would you give to someone who's looking to get involved or looking to give back in some sort of way?
make a distinction between service or revolution and charity, okay? I think often we build systems of aid, right, which actually keep things in their place or actually continue things as they are. And it's not coming out of bad desires on our part. I think people want to be good. But I think what has to change is the story, the system that is a global system at this point, which has impoverished 90% of the people of the world, which has led to this insane violence that is proliferating on women's bodies, but everywhere, men as well, the desecration of the planet. And I think if you want to give your life to something, change that system, because I think so often what we do is we end up aiding here and there, and we benefit a few people, but the systems stay in place. And then once that aid is gone, the systems continue. What we're doing in Congo is that we've built a place which is, it's really a center for revolution. And what we're doing is we're building leaders, revolutionary leaders, who will go back into their communities and lead and change those communities. You want to get out of the way. If you're giving outside this country, I think the job is how do you get out of the way and not make it about you, you know? And support what people in other countries are doing, because actually they know exactly what they're doing. I've yet to meet a woman activist anywhere from Kenya to Somalia who doesn't know what she's doing. They just need resources to do it. And I think often when Americans give, particularly people who have means, they assume that their money makes them special as opposed to lucky. And they give that way. They give with control, and they give in a form of colonization that ends up directing people rather than leading people to become empowered and to become independent, which is what they need. And I think I've learned a lot from the Congo and from the Congolese, so much, because really it's a country that's been colonized forever and robbed of agency and robbed of its soul and robbed of its heart. And the Congolese do not need anybody telling them what to do. What they need to be is left alone, and they need the war to end, and they need all the outside forces who are creating that war, fighting for minerals to dominate and take indigenous people's minerals away. They need them to stop so they can go on and have a life. And I think often our best intentions end up repeating people's wounds. So we have to be very conscious of how we give and how we serve.
Katie, how are we on time?
We have time for a couple more questions.
Okay.
Somebody hearing this?
We can't hear the question.
Can you stand out?
Louder?
Yeah.
Yeah. I studied Tai Chi for many years in practice, and I realized I was incested when I was a little girl, and the idea of living out of my body for years, I was always gravitating to something that would bring me back into the body, but then the body remembered what goes on and all that stuff. But the chalice, right, but we need, when you spoke online about the violence, gun violence, and men, I was so moved. David sharing the stories about how you can feel both this and
Yeah.
and it happens by the
Yeah.
chalice and the blade beating at the heart. And you said you wanted men to have crying, what was it?
Crying centers.
Crying centers.
Yeah, I thought we need to have crying centers all over cities where you can just drop in and cry, so you don't punch someone, you know? Yeah.
Because if we can do that, then we don't have to create this big thing and have to, but whatever it is, we embrace it.
Yeah.
And
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I love what you're saying, and I for those of you who didn't see, we did this amazing panel on Steubenville with these fabulous men, and who were so honest and so open, David Zirin and Tony Porter and Peter Buffett and Jimmy Briggs and this amazing coach named Joe Ehrman, who is a coach for young men. And this panel was so profound. And then we're just talking about what would push them to be men and what was masculinity and what was rape. But there was this coach there who said this beautiful, beautiful thing. And it's now become my mantra. He works with young boys, and he said he was a transformational coach. And I was like, wow, what's that? And he said, well, there are two types of coaches. There's transactional coaches and there's transformational coaches. And a transactional coach teaches boys to win at any cost. Like you will do anything you have to do to win. It's kind of like our system, okay? We're all in transaction, right? And then there are transformational coaches who teach boys how to be beautiful human beings while they're becoming great athletes. And I'm a transformational coach. And he said, and it turns out people become just as good at athletes when they're transformative as when they're but we haven't learned that yet. And so now I'm just walking through the world and I measure everything. Am I in transformation or am I in transaction? And it's really an interesting thing to ask yourself. You know, am I doing something to win and beat someone or get there, or am I doing something to transform human consciousness? And there'll be moments when you discover you're actually in transaction, and it's scary. And I think it's a good model, but I think it was also a very good discussion and a way of looking at men and helping men be able to live in a transformational modality because they've been so trained to be in transaction and to cut off their hearts. Yes? Can you stand up? Okay, did anybody hear the question? She said that she did a paper on me and there was a question she couldn't answer, and the question was I a feminist? Because I seemed to be nurturing the both sides of masculine and feminine, and she didn't know if that made a feminist. I think we all have to really have a huge dialogue about what it means to be a feminist. I've been getting this question so much on this tour. Everybody has a different, I saw a beautiful piece that was written on the internet the other day, which is My Feminism Is, and it was just a list of what this woman was calling her feminism. And I think, you know, feminism's gotten much more wide and varied and multi-layered and complicated. I don't think it's any one monolithic thing. But I can tell you for me, if there weren't feminists, if there hadn't been feminists, I wouldn't be sitting up here right now. I was on Joy Behar's show today, and we were talking about feminism, and we looked at each other and we started laughing as if she would be having a show, and I would be having a book, and we would be having this discourse 30 years ago. Feminists brought us here. We are here today because of our feminist mothers, period, period. And I think the problem is we don't know history in this country. We don't get taught history. We don't get taught about the history of our mothers and the history of our sisters, so we grow up ignorant of that history. So we don't know what the word feminist even means. What feminism means is social, political, and economic equality. Is there someone here who doesn't want that? Raise your hand. So why we're even disputing whether we're feminists or not is really a profound question. And I think it has a lot to do with the bad associations people created around feminists. For example, humorless. Okay, I'm fucking funny, okay? And I know most of the women I know, Kate Clinton is here. Can you stand up, Kate Clinton? She's fucking funny, okay? Okay? Fucking funny, okay? I look around this room. Every woman I know is funny. How do we survive? You know, we have irony, you know? So the idea, let's just take that myth right there. You know, I heard Kate Clinton once say she thought the reason that they came up with that story is that there were a group of women sitting around and they were laughing so hard they couldn't breathe, and a man heard it and he was really jealous and he made up that story, you know? And I think to some degree there's something true about it, but I would really urge us all to be proud to be feminists, to say that we stand on the shoulders and on really painful history. I look at the women who are like 20 years older than me. I don't know if you all read the story recently of Shulamith Firestone, okay, in the New Yorker. It was a heartbreaking story of what she went through to break through consciousness, to change things, and the inside fighting, the outside fighting, the eruption that came when women had the chutzpah and gall to claim equal status. They did that for us. We're here because of them. To say you're not a feminist is to spit on that. It's to claim that. And I think, yes, my feminism involves loving men. It's always involved loving men. It's never involved not loving men. But it's also involved women loving women and women coming forward. And those two things are not at odds. They are in agreement. So I think we all need to go out and wear big feminist signs and say, yes, I am proud. I'm a feminist. What'd you say?
You are the richest woman I ever met.
How did
How did you go?
pain? You know, I think one of the things we're so scared of in this country is to feel pain, is to feel compassion, is to connect with others. You know, I see how people walk by poor people in this country. I see how people come into a room and some people matter and some people don't. I see how people who serve us get dismissed. I see how nurses are underpaid, undermined, undervalued, and they keep us alive. I see how domestic workers are dissed and put to the back when they're taking care of our children, they're taking care of our needs. You know, part of it is like, how do we open our hearts so we feel the suffering and we feel the needs and we feel what's around us? And that's how I'm rich, because other people have entered me, because the world lives in my body, and I am in the world, and there's no separation anymore. And that's the work. The work is to get connected, you know, to not be afraid of the person next to you, to not be afraid of homeless people, to understand that we're a step away from that, every one of us, you know? And I think it's the antithesis to what Reagan ushered into this country in those horrible days of the Reagan years when we became selfish and self-centered and narcissistic and me. And we need to usher in a new period, which involves everybody taking care of everybody and looking out for each other. You know, we've amassed our fortunes, the people at the top, they've amassed their fortunes and they're empty and lonely. You know, we all need to be in this story together and rejoice in this story. It's an amazing story. I look at 1 Billion Rising, okay? I've been looking at the videos, of all the videos that were sent to me around the world. I sit in the room and I cry. Women with butter lamps in Bhutan spinning. Women in Somalia who had chadors, the black chadors and red miniskirts, dancing in the streets of Somalia for the first time in the history of Somalia. I look at people who braved their lives. We are in this together across the planet. And when you see people rising and you see people dancing and you see people's willingness to face murder and face like their lives being crushed for freedom, we all have to be that brave. We all have to be for each other, for each other. Thank you so much to Mark Matousek. Mark has been my friend for a long, long time, and my brother. And we've been on an incredible journey, and it was really important to me tonight that he did this interview. And I just love him, and he's a brilliant writer and a brilliant thinker, and he's really encouraged the best parts of me. So thank you, Mark.
One more round of applause, please.